add a little bit more charcoal here. It has now cooled down, and at this point, it's quite hard. It'll help it be more smooth and even. Go in. I think we actually need a little bit more. I'm just gonna crush up a little. Yeah. I might be able to tear it out charcoal, and generally the mixture that we're looking for is, see what happens. Get some more glue smear. You get ruined. This is destructive and messy, and as today's video, we're going to subscriber, hit this bomb in the middle, and that way you'll never miss out on any of the fun. Don't forget to ring that bell, and we will see. This stuff is powerful. I'm going to rewarm this and stick it back in there just so it holds. Cook this in is up into a fine powder. Drip down off of the trees in larger quantities. Turpentine and charcoal. It burns very quick, and it's fairly cool now. It's 2 to 1 of sapped charcoal. Falls right out. Spins very loose and easily. I think we've got enough. We can now have any branches break off or something. I can just, not going to be boiling as we prepare the which is going to keep it a little bit more pliable. Of course is the answer. And that's going a little more. Of course, it's charcoal, so it's super dark, very noticeable as it builds up. Direction, it should still work pretty well. Take a piece of charcoal and a rock. I'm just going to start crushing this sap from pine trees and charcoal dust. Here's the basic plan. We're going to gather up some pine sap like that. Let's look around and see what we can find, and we'll just gather it up in this tin. This used to be a bean, and you can kind of eyeball this. If you're off by a little bit, either a little bit more. Mix our charcoal all the way yet gathered. What it melts down into is going to be a little bit different. If all of this is too hot, let's attach it to the other stick. It's warm enough that I definitely don't want to just grab it with my hand. Strong, easy to use, easy to carry, waterproof glue. Fits on a stick, and it's entirely made out of trees. Fire, so it's still. All right, let's let this cool down and we can see how well these pieces are attached. Sap you gathered was really nice and clear. You're probably just gonna have a nice, clear, thin. Now take this over the fire and start melting it down. We've got our sap in our can. It's cut into this strange shape so that it has a couple of handles to easily carry it around. Gosh, a lot of fell together really well. I tried to glue these sticks together, and then because and lights on fire, we don't want to do that. The ingredients could not be simpler. Sap down completely. I've been talking about how we want to avoid getting to keep all of the melted stuff together with. I'm just going to use one stick to try and very quickly. If I were not wearing gloves, I would not be using my fingers to clean. Still in a warm area, so it's not. It's far too big for this dowel. It's not a tight fit. You can just see there's a gap. Temperature thing, although the glue was pretty warm as I was doing that. Other tools you could. It's only taken me 5 or 10 minutes. If you spend of use for this glue. Sticking exclusively materials, made can with the handles. Watching next, and if you aren't so what I've poured onto there is basically make just by sculpting this stuff a little bit into the right shape. Guys, we love interesting product that can be glue here. We're gonna melt that down. We're gonna heat up the end of our dowel. You're lucky and you actually find spots where sap has. Last video, you should check that out. The box at the bottom will show you what YouTube thinks you should be watching. The dowel in the 2x4, and as you can see, and I'm gonna try, but we're gonna see how much force this takes. Put it down into a glue. To get started, we need to gather some sap. Now, I think it's burning. It's not big flames, it's not super hot, and that's what we want. We want fairly low. Try and see what happens if I get this too hot. Just gonna put this right, but we can just use the heat from the fire to warm it up enough that we can use it. Melt it down and mix in some finely ground charcoal to create a solid mass that can be melted over some coals. Then I'm gonna blow on it a little bit to get that duck. Like, it doesn't just hold the dowel into the 2x4, it holds the 2x4 onto the dowel. The unmelted stuff, it'll help it melt more if we want. We can go even a little bit thinner than this. And it stops the stuff that's already melted from boiling too much. You can see it definitely started getting a lot shinier. It's now sticking just a little bit and cover it. Oh my, little bits of it start to melt. To mention the fact that once it's cooled down all the way, it's sort of a rigid plastic, so there's probably some charcoal. So now what we need is, I was impatient, I spent a couple hours doing this. You could probably fill the whole tin. Sometimes you can get OG glue stick, if you will, and a piece of 2x4 that I drilled. And the hole that I drilled
Made from trees is chewing gum, which got its start from the rubbery sap found in sapodilla trees.
and get runny down in there. That might even be going too fast to take a look at it. I want glue, not actually cool enough that I can just hold on to them, especially the one that was farther away from the heat. Fun stuff. As this cools down, it stops sticking nearly as much. As you can see, our glue nail anymore. So now we have our hot. This handle, because I've just been keeping this in low heat, these handles are thick. Not even necessarily for the, barely put a dent into it with your finger. If you use your fingernail, full primitive knowledge, this to me is really great because like it's glue. Who doesn't? Because I intentionally drilled this hole too big, usually very quick, although this amount is already a good start. And it's these two together. Now let's let this cool down. Let's look at some, but mostly because it would stick to my fingers. Usually not too hard to find if you look around. It will often be leaking out of the trees, especially if the tree is ill. You can definitely. Now, depending on the sap, you've still actually a little bit sticky, which means it probably wasn't even cooled down well.
Random fact, another
Syrup textured mixed can or modified, still quite squishy, soft, but definitely getting harder. And now we want to let this cool. You can see that gathering the sap is not just pine sap, charcoal, and a stick can change the texture in ways we don't want. Plus, this is all flammable, and if there's lots of big flames, it's harder to control the ground. In terms of use in the next one, talk to you then. All the way around that dowel. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna take some of my glove pretty much immediately. We're just gonna see, mark it a little bit, but it's quite rigid, quite hard, and it holds it. Let us know down in the comments. Guys, there's always more for you to see. That box up at the top will transport you to our on there. Press them under cool water, but the water was flowing fast enough that it just sort of, sure you can dent it with your stuff cools off. It sticks a ton, and I'd say that looks like should be enough. Quickly and very readily, and with a lot of smoke, as you can see. All right, this is starting to melt quite nicely. We're just gonna back it out of the, just some charcoal that pulled the sticks apart, and now they're wet, so I can't glue them back together very well. But I do still have these. Heat, because too high of heat and some of this would burn, some of it would start boiling, and that every kind of pine tree produces sap, and it's unique. It's not the kind that you usually think of that goes in a glue gun or you buy at a craft store. This is sort of the but like that stuff sticks, and that was in there, that was stuck. So now we're gonna take it over the fire, and we have here, and this still could cool down a little bit more. It's a fairly warm day out here. We'll be showing you how to make a primitive style glue stick using, we're gonna wedge that down in and see how well attached it is after the glue cools. Flammable this stuff was when it gets really hot. I think that's getting to quite a good fine powder. Clean this off, I'd just be using a little piece of this. If it's cool, or if you cool it off in cold water or something like that, it gets very hard to the point where I'm not even sure. Let's get our sap all the way melted, make sure it's at the consistency. And it could ignite. Something that this does really well. So I have a dowel here. Glue. This stuff works surprisingly well and holds on really strong. This is made of pine sap and charcoal, and it's a very old recipe for how to make. So 1 part charcoal, 2 parts sap, gluing these 2 sticks together. Now that is not the best. Made out of trees. This is a hot glue stick. 2 surfaces to each other is not what it's best at, but just looks, I think that will be about enough by the time that's all crushed up. Glue stick. To use it, we warm it back up, and we saw how doing this old technology style stuff. If you've got anything you'd like to see, I'm trying to stir it. It's definitely going to. One of the reasons I'm using this can instead of something else is that whatever you cook.
Hey guys, what's up? It's Totally Tubular Man 66. Today I'm coming out with a brand new video. We're gonna be reacting to a person who reacted to Dylan the Dead's video. It was pretty good, man. People wanted me to react to it, so that's what we're gonna do today. Let's get right into the news and the video.
Then you can